Good evening, everyone, and we'll have a class. May the words of Torah be a schus for a refuah shalema for all those who were injured in this tragic event that occurred in Miron an hour or two ago. And may Rabban Shalom should have mercy on Klal Yisrael, and we should hear good news. Today's shir is sponsored by Rabbi Mark and Helen Breslow. It's to commemorate the yahrzeits of Mark's brother Ephraim Yosef ben Simcha, Zichrono Livracha, and Mark's father Simcha ben Yaakov, Zichrono Livracha. Thank you so much, Mark and Helen, for sponsoring. Neshama should have an aliyah from our words of Torah study here tonight. And I thank you all for joining. With the tragedy in mind, but at the same time, it is a significant day, and perhaps we could intensify and learn something from what this day is about. So what we're going to do here tonight is we're going to obviously talk about Lag BaOmer, and I'm giving the name of the day. This is not my count because I haven't counted yet. It's the name of the day. It's a very inspiring day for many. There's a reason that tens of thousands of people make their way to be inspired there in Miron and throughout the world. A few hours ago, I actually watched for a few minutes the dancing before the tragedy there. And there's something very inspiring, especially after a year of Jewish people not getting together. There was something inspiring. So what I would like to do tonight is a little bit be inspired, or to talk about what kind of message can we learn from this day? What is it about? What can we learn from it? And also, as someone that's always interested in the history and the progression of our traditions. In other words, I like seeing an historical track. If there's something I do, I want to know where it originated, why we do it. Was it always done like that? And especially when it comes to practices and traditions that are not in the Talmud, I start off with a big question mark. Where did that come from, right? Do we need to do it? Do all agree that we need to do it? And these questions that I ask are always going to be with respect. I respect all Jews and I respect traditions. Klal Yisrael, they're doing incredible things. So I'm not questioning as much as trying to understand what really is this day about. Now, I'm sure you've heard in the past that I've mentioned that this tradition of going to Miron on Lag BaOmer probably did not exist in the 14th century. And it started at some point. At some point it started. And someone could ask a very basic question. Rabbi, is it really possible that out of nowhere some practice begins and it takes off? Do you really think that that's doable, that something starts at some point? In other words, my belief is that it became popular in the 16th century. Is it possible that suddenly on the 16th century, someone says a few words and as a result, this new movement starts? So therefore, I'm going to start my discussion about Miron and about Lag BaOmer actually with the city of Tveria. So our discussion will start with Tveria and how does that happen? So a few days ago, on the 14th of Iyar, several Jews, I don't know if it was dozens or hundreds, made their way to Tveria for the Hilulah, for the celebration of the elevation, call it Yortzeit, of Rabbi Meir Baal Hanes. Okay? A rabbi from the era of the Mishnah, according to tradition, buried in Tveria, and Jews get together in Tveria at his gravesite. And what I have here is a clip from the media, from a Haredi website, where they tell you that you should know, you should tune in at 9 p.m. Israeli time to go ahead and celebrate the yahrzeit of Rabbi Meir Baal Hanes, right? And we're told it's going to take place at 9 o'clock, and you could watch it on the Arutz, on our channel. Fine. Tveria, by the way, is a wonderful city. I like Tveria. I like all places in Israel. Tveria, for me, is also meaningful because I'm a believer that our traditions and what they teach regarding the future are actually going to occur. And the Rambam tells us that there's a tradition that the Sanhedrin, before it makes its way to Yerushalayim with the building of the Beis Hamikdash, it will actually meet in Tveria. In other words, somehow the process of the final redemption and the arrival of Mashiach, Tveria plays a role, and the Sanhedrin is going to meet there. And therefore, I believe that Tveria is a good place to be. Why not? I'm sure real estate prices will go up there at one point due to the fact that it's going to be the location where we perhaps even welcome the Mashiach. So I think that Tveria for all of us is significant. So now what I'm asking you is, or what we're going to try to address is, this Hilula for Rab Meir Baal Hanes, when did that start? In other words, people do gather in Tveria. When did that start? So I found something very interesting. There were, in the second half of the 19th century, many Jewish newspapers, and they were weeklies, and Jews were interested in knowing what's happening throughout the world, throughout the Jewish world. So there were those who published. There was a fellow by the name of Yisrael Dov Frumkin, who published the Chavatzelet, and I think he started it around 1870, and it was printed in Yerushalayim, circulated throughout the Jewish world, even reached Europe, and he would share of what's happening, especially in Eretz Yisrael, for people that wanted to know. There was an era of interest of what's occurring there. So that's the Chavatzelet. So I'm sharing with you here, and this is a copy I got online, of the Chavatzelet that's recording some information in, or sharing with us, or I'm sharing with you, the Chavatzelet from Taf Resh Lamed Gimel corresponds to 1873. And in one of the sections, this is not the first, I just moved it up to get to the point, he tells us a little bit about what's happening in Tveria. Okay, so someone's writing to the editor of the Chavatzelet, who is in Yerushalayim, giving him a little bit of an update of the events that are occurring in Tveria in 1873. So he tells us as follows, that you should know, we in Tveria know very well that not so far away in Miron, they have these incredible celebrations on Lag BaOmer. And as a result of the celebrations, many people make their way to Miron. They come for the Hadlaka, they come to Miron for the lighting of the bonfire, and due to its significance, they are able to sell the honor of lighting to the highest bidder. And many, many people in Miron make significant nedavot. They make significant donations to the charities that are there. Okay? And so that's what we're told here. Yinadvu bayom hazeh kesef rav, a lot of money. Lechvod, in the honor of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, in the honor of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Schuto yagen aleinu. That's the Zayin Yud Ayin Aleph. And what happens is that all the money, it seemed to be a very effective fundraising operation for the community and for the scholars in Miron, because the money would be given to the wise men of the Sfaradim, who are actually not even living in Miron, but next door in Sfat. Sfat is right next to Miron. Now, as a result of the funds that came in, they were able to build a Bet Midrash Mefuar, And then they have an area where they welcome the Orchim. Tragically, that's exactly where the events occurred a few hours ago, that the tragic events that we mentioned. And that occurs every single year. So now he shares with us, and again, this is an author in Tveria describing that taking place, describing that which is taking place in Sfat. So he notes that about 6 years ago, ze keshesh shanim. Okay, look where the arrow is. Asher hechelu anshei Tveria lekanebam. About 6 years ago, so that corresponds to 1867, people in Tveria, the scholars in Tveria, were jealous. Miron took off. Sfat, as a result, is benefiting as well. And they write, so the people of Tveria were saying, Be'amram, halogam betochenu kvurim tanaim betzadikim yesodei olam. In other words, if everyone is making their way to visit the righteous tzadikim who are buried in Miron and in Sfat, let's also market the tzaddikim that we have here in Tveria. Asher bam nitpaer, we could go ahead and glorify the city with the righteous people that are buried here. Umadua nigramem, why should we be worse? So the scholars in 1867, right? He's telling us the exact date. He's writing this in 1873. He's telling us that this took place 6 years earlier. Vegamru, and therefore they were determined, la'asot hadlaka, that, you know what, let's have our hilula, al kever hatana rameir bal hanes, biyom yudalid iyar pesach sheni. So let's go ahead and do it here. And he notes that people started their travels towards Miron, into Israel, probably from the communities in Syria. And if they're passing by anyway, let's do it. And they could stay here ad achre Pesach Sheni. In any event, what I see from here is that things could suddenly start. So regarding Miron, and regarding the fact that people get together for the bonfires, and the fact that Lag BaOmer is a significant day, and we commemorate something that relates to Rab Shimon Bar Yochai, yes, its significance showed up about 500 years ago, and clearly I'm going to want to find something practical, something I can learn from it, something that will inspire me and inspire us, to tap into whatever this day is about. But we're going to talk a little bit about the history. How did it start? So what we need to remember is the following. So we discussed last week that the Omer period, there was a tradition that goes back over 1,000 years, that yes, we mourn the passing of the disciples of Rabbi Akiva. From Pesach to Shavuot, however, there was a tradition that they stopped dying a half a month before Shavuos. So you could shave 15 days off the 49, and therefore, when you reach day 34, you can end the mourning, okay? And that's what Shulchan Aruch tells us. He's not the first that tells us that. This is mentioned by earlier authorities. Nohagim, in other words, the custom is, Shelo leistaper ad Lag LaOmer. We don't get our haircuts until Lag LaOmer, because she'omrim, there is a tradition, she'az pasku melamut, that the tragic events and the passing of the disciples of Rabbi Akiva came to an end on that day. However, says Rabbi Yosef Karo, now remember, this is a Sephardi authority who lives in Sfas, and he's writing this in 1565, that you should know, ve'en leistaper, no haircut until lamed daled baboker. In other words, you want to shave off 15 days, fine. So mourn a little bit on day 34, and then on day 34, your mourning ends. Rabbi Yosef Karo shares nothing regarding Lag BaOmer. It plays no significance at all. And it's surprising because he had a neighbor down the road by the name of Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, the great mystic known to us as the Arizal, the individual that really gets the credit that for the past 500 years, the direction of Judaism, right, and so many practices have been affected by him. Rabbi Yosef Karo knew the individual, and for that person, Lag BaOmer was extremely significant. For the Arizal and for the Kabbalists and for the mystics, it's a very important day. Rabbi Yosef Karo makes no mention. What's also interesting is the one that introduces it into halacha is an Ashkenazi authority, the Ramo. So this is written by the Ramo. We know the Ramo lived in Krakow born 1520, dies 1572 on Lag BaOmer, and there was a tradition by Polish Jews to make their way to the burial site of the Ramo on Lag BaOmer, and he is the one that shares with us that you should know. Ubemedinot elu, in these countries, in European communities, Germany, Poland, Hungary, ein nohagin kidvarav, we don't follow the practice mentioned by Rabbi Yosef Karo that you need to wait until day 34. Ela, rather, mistaprim, you get your haircut. Beyom lamed gimel, you get your haircut on Yom lamed gimel. Fine, Lag BaOmer is important. And he notes that you should know it's not just that you end your morning, and it's not just that you can go ahead and turn on the music and have a wedding and get your haircut, but rather umarbim bo ktsat simcha. We go ahead and we increase our happiness. How does it manifest itself? Ein omrim bo tachanun. We don't say the tachanun prayer. The tachanun prayer, it's a prayer of intense emotions. We talk about tears. It's a prayer that we cut out, and that's a sign of happiness. So it's fascinating. The Rama is the one that introduces it. But what we have, and as we enter, right, if you would ask a European Jew in the year, if you ask a European Jew in the year, let's say 1580, 1590, what is Lag BaOmer? He would say it's a day that we are happy. Why? Well, disciples of Rabbi Akiva were no longer dying. None of them would know any connection at all between the day and Rab Shimon Bar Yochai. No Ashkenazi Jew would know of anything that links Lag BaOmer to Miron. Now that changes in the 17th century drastically, because suddenly Jews are, or Torah Jews, many of them are deeply inspired by the mystical teachings that were presented and clarified by the Arizal Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, and they enter into European communities. And I often mention the fact that when Rabbi Yeshayahu Horowitz, the Shloah HaKadosh, when his works are published in 1630, they became extremely popular. So if you look at the years between 1630 and 1660, no doubt that suddenly people become aware of the fact that, you know what? The mystics in Tzfat taught that the day of Lag BaOmer is significant because of Rab Shimon Bar Yochai. There is some kind of connection. The city of Miron does have a deep connection to this day. And the first work published in halachic literature, a commentator on Shulchan Aruch by a Rabbi Menachem Mendel Auerbach of Krakow, author of Ateret Zkenim, when the Ramo tells us in Omrim Bo Tachanun, all the Ramo says no Tachnun, he is the one that shares with the European communities that you should know that there is a minhag, that the minhag is in Eretz Israel. Shenohagin, they have the practice. Leilech, to go on Lag BaOmer, al kivrei Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. It's in the plural because his son is buried there as well. Biyom Lag BaOmer. On the day of Lag BaOmer, you go to Miron. That's the tradition. So he's the first. Okay. Now we have not yet a clear understanding of what happened. Why do we visit that grave? But at least we have suddenly a link and a connection. Fine. Now, the way the Jewish world really identifies the significance of the day and the location and its connection to Rab Shimon Bar Yochai is due to the fact that there was a disciple of Rab Yitzchak Luria, known as Rab Chaim Vital. Rab Chaim Vital. Rab Chaim Vital is the one that really recorded all the teachings of his master. His manuscripts are really the source for a significant amount of practices and teachings of the Arizal. And he's the one that tells us that you should know Lag BaOmer has everything to do with Rab Shimon Bar Yochai. It is his day. It is his day. And the way it appears in some sources, and this is a later source, that it is the day of Simchat Rab Shimon Bar Yochai. It's the day of Simchat, the happiness of Rab Shimon Bar Yochai. Why is he happy? Well, perhaps his teachings were transmitted on that day. It is the day of his Simchat. But it appears, and this is something that there are manuscripts that indicate that could prove it. It appears that some read the word that is written, the word Simchat, some of them read it and they left out one letter. They left out the chet. And if you cut out the chet in the day of Simchat Rab Shimon Bar Yochai, you have that this was the day she met Rab Shimon Bar Yochai. So there are those who believe that identifying Lag BaOmer as the day of the passing of Rab Shimon Bar Yochai has no real source at all. No such source. And it's interesting. I found, this is an article of a tremendous scholar who got a hold of a very early manuscript. And it could be the actual handwriting, most probably is, the actual handwriting of Rab Chaim Vital, the disciple of Rabbi Yitzchak Luria. This is a handwriting, this is a manuscript that is sitting now in Oxford. It's sitting now in Oxford. And the way it reached Oxford is because there was a very wealthy Torah scholar in the beginning of the 18th century, Rabbi David Oppenheim. We talked about Rabbi David Oppenheim in the past. If you remember when we learned a little bit about Purim, and we talked about a question that he addressed, there was a Megillas Esther that was written by a woman. And Rabbi David Oppenheim wrote a tshuva to say that it's 100% kosher. And then he goes on and talking about how incredible it is and how talented this woman is. And she's so knowledgeable, this is unseen. And he's shepping nachas. And then we were able to show from later sources that the woman that Rabbi David Oppenheim was talking about, that wrote a Megillas Esther, was his daughter. So a wealthy individual, and it's not so far-fetched that a wealthy person can hire tutors, and he had a very wealthy, a very educated daughter as well, and obviously extremely talented and knowledgeable. So Rabbi Oppenheim had a great collection of ancient manuscripts. Eventually, they landed up in Oxford, Bodleian Connection in Oxford. And I have here a copy. It's very hard to read it. They're very hard to read this manuscript. But the story behind it goes as follows. As you know, for mystical people, the concept of communicating with a neshama, with a soul of someone that is no longer alive is considered normal. It's considered normal. So we have many such traditions of people communicating with neshamos of great people of the past. Fine, how you accept it and how you deal with it, it depends on your school. It depends on what you do and do not believe. That's not what we're going to address here today. It appears, and this is a tradition that appears in the writings of Reb Chaim Vital, that the Arizal, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, on Lag BaOmer was in Miron, and he was communicating with the neshama, with the soul of Rab Shimon Bar Yochai. Standing there next to them was a person who said the prayer of Nachem. The prayer of Nachem. It's a sad prayer, and some people that appear would say it on any day when you're allowed to be sad. And Rab Shimon Bar Yochai, his soul, his neshama, communicates with Rabbi Yitzchak Luria and tells him, why is that person saying Nachem on a day of happiness for me? So if you could read it here in the manuscript, or you could read it here how it is typed out. Emor lo. So these are the words of Rab Shimon Bar Yochai, who died in the 2nd century, but he's sharing with us something from the second half of the 16th century. Emor lo leish hazeh, tell this person who is saying a prayer of sadness, okay? And you see the word here, you could see it up here as well. Shelama hu omer nachem biyom simchati. Why is he saying Nachem, a sad prayer? It's my day of happiness. Rab Shimon Bar Yochai is happy today. Okay? Now, as you are writing a manuscript, sometimes when you are writing a word several times, you're not going to write out the whole word, but you're going to write 2 words with a colon, with some kind of streichel, as they would say in Yiddish, and there was an understanding that you are referring to the previous word. So it continues. The manuscript tells us, and this is Reb Chaim Vital, V'ta'am simchati. Now, the simchati is spelled here without the last 3 letters, shin mem. The reason of simchat, the happiness of Rab Shimon Bar Yochai, biyom lamed gimel laomer, you know why he's happy? Ki hu mitalmidei Rabbi Akiva, because he was one of the disciples of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva's disciples died. He didn't, so he was happy. Shehu, and again, shin mem, which I assume simchat lag ba'omer, period. Okay. So it appears that since you have the shin mem right here, shin mem again right here, there are those who believe, there are those who are actually convinced that the idea of identifying Lag BaOmer as the day of passing of Rab Shimon Bar Yochai is because they misread this Shin Mem. They saw Shin Mem and they didn't realize that it's Simchati, but rather Shemet. That's what we are told. Perhaps it's a little bit of obviously you have to be careful who you share such statements with. Clearly, and this is the area where I could start saying, what is it if so yes about? In other words, how can I become inspired by Lag BaOmer? I ain't going to Miron, that's for sure. I'm not saying Tachnun tomorrow, I'm going to be happy a little bit. So what is the day yes about? So I'm going to turn for some guidance to number 1, a rabbi. His name was, we've talked about him in the past, Rabbi Chizkiah de Silva, the Pri Chodesh, one of the greatest rabbinic authorities of the past 400 years, one of the greatest, tragically died at a young age. He wasn't even 40 when he died. We actually have a schus, a merit of having an actual portrait of the Pri Chadash. And the reason we have a portrait is he landed up in Amsterdam in 1691 to publish his work, and he took a portrait of him. I'm trying to find a better picture of the original. I think the portrait is sitting in some basement of the Israel Museum, but I once saw a book where this was in color. I'm still looking for it. So Reb Chizkiah de Silva is a Talmid Chacham. He is extremely knowledgeable in all areas of halacha. And he's going to share with us what I believe something quite inspiring. But beforehand, he struggles with an issue. And let's study his issue. The issue he is struggling with is the development of the Sephardi mystical communities in Eretz Israel over the 17th century. In other words, Rabbi Yosef Karo tells us, Rabbi Yosef Karo, who guides halachically Sephardi Jewry in Eretz Israel and throughout the world, he makes it clear that you don't get your haircut, you don't have a wedding until day 34. But on the other hand, as mysticism took off, day 33 became a day of celebration. So it seems quite odd for the Sephardi. The Sephardi is dealing here with a contradiction. On the one hand, he's waiting till day 34 for his haircut, but on the other hand, he is celebrating on day 33 because the Kabbalists say you should. So that's what he notes here. Tema. It's surprising. De achshav, nowadays, okay, so he's writing this in 1690. Nahagu, the custom is leharbot besimcha. We're all happy on Lag Bomer, no question about it. Vishelo lomar tachnun. We don't say tachnun. But nevertheless, einan mistaprim ela ad lamedalid. But when it comes for a haircut, they wait till day 34. So this seems to be like a tarte de satran. It seems to be two practices that contradict one another. So obviously, he is identifying the reality of Sephardi traditions, that mysticism, Kabbalah teachings, the teachings of the Arizal, they take over Sephardi communities. And therefore, I doubt there's anyone left in the Sephardi communities that wait till day 34, because day 33 became important. But now, and this is what talks to me, he asked the question, Umiu, however, yesh ledakdek, we need to analyze here. Besimcha zu lama. What's the happiness really about? What's it about? What are we happy on Lag Bomer? And if you tell me that it's because Pasku Melamot, that the tragic passing of the disciples of Rabbi Akiva comes to an end, well, what's the big deal? They were no longer alive. Ma bekach, what's the big deal? Harei lo nisharu echad mehem. None of them were left alive. So what do you mean we're celebrating? Because they no longer died, we suddenly don't say tachnun. V'kulam metu uma tiva shel shin simchazu. He's trying to understand his happiness. So then he tells us, perhaps, that you know why we're happy. So this is the most important statement that we could read here. Al otam talmidim she'osif achar kach. Do you know Rabbi Akiva suffered? He lost his students. It appeared that there's not going to be a future of Torah scholarship. There's not going to be a spiritual future for Klal Yisrael. Rabbi Akiva, after these tragic events, didn't give up, right? Didn't say, I did my part, and due to the devastating news, just give up, but rather, Hosif achar kach, he added more disciples. He continued his mission, and they lived on. And the ones that lived on are the ones that kept Torah alive. Now, why is this inspiring for me? Difficulties in life exist. No question about it. Difficulties. We're going through a difficult time. We just heard terrible news a few hours ago. Difficulties exist. What we could learn from Rabbi Akiva is the fact that he had the ability to rebuild after devastation. after a tragedy, and it knocks you out. You feel drained. There's nothing left within you. He clearly felt that, but he was able to rebuild. And we celebrate his new students. According to this explanation, we're not just celebrating Rab Shimon Bar Yochai today, which clearly it's an important day for him, but we're celebrating the new students. The Talmud identifies 5 of them, and they were the ones who rebuilt Torah. They rebuilt the future. And what could be more encouraging after a difficult period of time, or as we are going through a difficult time, to be inspired by those who tell us, you know what, yes, it's difficult. Yes, you're drained. Yes, you feel you have no more kochos, you don't have strength, but you could continue doing good. You could continue rebuilding. That's Rabbi Akiva. That's what he was able to do. And this is a day that symbolizes it. The tragedy ended, now we rebuild. And if you think about our nation, and I can take pride in our nation, of what we've achieved since the Shoah, since 1945, that's the spirit of Rabbi Akiva. You know, fact is, we did some incredible things. It's supernatural, building a Jewish state, building Torah institutions, building shuls, people that were able to start a life and they have continuity after the Holocaust. That's something to celebrate. That's a Lag BaOmer. That's what the day is about. I'm inspired by these words, but I'm going to also share with you a little bit of what my father would teach, and more on the mystical side of things. And it works as follows. The mystics believe, the Kabbalists, many of the Sfardim, clearly the Hasidim, that to really get the world to the next stage, in other words, to fix this world, bring the Mashiach, we need the teachings of the Kabbalah to spread. That's a fundamental part of their belief. There's a legend that when the Baal Shem Tov met the Mashiach, he asked him, when are you going to come? And the Mashiach says to the Baal Shem Tov that when your teachings spread out. So therefore, there are many that deeply believe in mysticism, and it's considered in the highest level of Torah study. There are those who do it. Obviously, I'm not. It's not my field. I didn't grow up with such an education. But there are those who believe that if you want to take the world from its natural cycle, the world of nature that we live in, and get it to a completely changed world, to a new world, you need the teachings of mysticism. Many, and this appears in Hasidic sources, that the happiness of Rab Shimon Bar Yochai on this day is due to the fact that he taught mysticism, Kabbalah, to his students on this day. And the reason we have Kabbalistic teachings, it is because of Lag BaOmer. And therefore the Zohar is attributed to Rab Shimon Bar Yochai. It's the day of mysticism. Now, if mysticism is really what is needed to bridge the gap from the natural cycle we live in to a completely changed world, we can appreciate, this is what my father said, we can appreciate the significance of day 33. And he would say the following, numbers in Judaism are very significant. The number 7 always represents a natural cycle, the 7 days of the week. A person, lo aleinu, has to recover from a loss and he needs to mourn. You mourn through a natural cycle, 7 days. That's what 7 represents. The number 40, on the other hand, represents a complete change. For example, when it comes to a fetus, it's considered a fetus, according to halacha, 40 days after conception. When it comes, for example, to grape juice that you crush and you want to consider it to a new entity, wine, it's completely changed after 40 days. When the world needed to go through this recreation during the flood of Noah, it was for 40 days. When Moshe Rabbeinu had to go through a complete change from a human being to one who speaks the word of God, he was on the top of the mountain for 40 days. When a person wants to go through a process of purification and he goes into a body of water called the mikvah changes you. You are a new person. What's the measurement of a mikvah according to tradition? 40 measurements of a se'ah, well-known measurement in Talmudic times. 40 represents a complete change. Now, if we put this all together, the teachings of Kabbalah are here to take the world from its natural cycle from the 7 and use it to bridge the gap and allow us to reach that 40, the complete change, What is the number? What is the number that links 7 to 40? 40 minus 7, 33. That's why the number 33 is a day that symbolizes the idea that with the teachings of this day, you could go ahead and be a partner in making that complete change from the natural cycle to a whole new world, to the world of the 40. This is what my father would share. So my father was in tune with these things, interested in these things. For me personally, I walk away with the Pri Chadash. It is to inspire me. There are challenges. You wake up in the morning, you do your best, you do your part. You try to teach, you try to inspire, you try to uplift yourself, uplift others, deal with the world and tragedies that we know about and the difficulties. There's a better tomorrow. There is a tomorrow. Optimism. That's Lag BaOmer. Now, I think we've mentioned in the past that the great Khatam Sofer, and when it comes to rabbinic literature, it is a text. I go through responsa. There's something very special about reading the Khatam Sofer, his clarity, his assessment of realities. So in one of his shuvas, he talks about the new movement that is taking place that made Miron and Sfat the hub of the land of Israel. And I've mentioned this several times, that if I would make Aliyah to Eretz Israel towards the end of the 18th or the beginning of the 19th century, the location of significance, the go-to location was not Yerushalayim, unfortunately, but Sfat and Miron, due to the fact that mysticism took off. That was the norm. Now, for the Khatam Sofer, this was problematic because Yerushalayim is our hub. Jews should be in Yerushalayim. The fact that Yerushalayim is a city that is basically empty, no one's interested in, is an insult to the city. And the Khatam Sofer had a major problem with the fact that the north, Sfat Miron, was attracting people. And he was even more disturbed with this new yontif called Lag BaOmer. And he notes that you should know, I've heard that nowadays people come mimerchak yavo, they come from a distance. Yidreshu et Hashem be'ir HaKodesh Tzfat b'yom lamed gimel BaOmer. He heard that they come to Tzfat, and he refers to Miron as well. They are two mountains, one next to the other. They come for the Hilul of Rashbi. I've heard about it, he notes. But he tells us that I myself, if I would be there, Haiti ani min haprushim, I would have separated myself. I wouldn't be like such people. Like Ben Drutai, a Talmudic authority that separated himself due to a dispute on a technical matter, because I believe I don't want to go there and be mishanem minagam velo ertze litchaber imahem b'zeh. I really don't want to be part of it. Khatam Sofer did not buy into it. And in general, in many yeshivot, going to Miron is not encouraged. Study of Torah is. Miron is not the go-to place for Lag BaOmer. Yes, we can learn on this day, we can be inspired. But for him, the fact that they are making it a hub and ignoring Yerushalayim is not right. And as we know, I've mentioned in the past that Yerushalayim had this massive increase from the year 1837 to the year 1867. It was due to the fact that there was the tragic earthquake in Sfat in the beginning of 1837. And also Jews were allowed to enter into Yerushalayim for technical reasons. The Muslims did not allow Ashkenazim in for many years. And by the late 1860s, Yerushalayim is overflowing, and therefore Montefiore goes ahead and starts the process of expanding outward. And the growth of Yerushalayim, which for any thinking Jew, it is something extremely inspiring and uplifting, is a journey that we celebrate. Perhaps no coincidence, in 10 days from now, we're going to go ahead and celebrate Yom Yerushalayim. In any event, what is Lag BaOmer about? Well, it depends for who. It's significant, yes. It is a day that could uplift everyone. If you're in tune and Kabbalistic teachings teach to you, there are things that we learned tonight about it. But clearly, it's a time that we could strengthen ourselves and use the words of the Pri Chadash. Difficulty there is. How we address it is what makes us. And we can make ourselves into great people by rebuilding, right? We are all going to be rebuilding. A couple months from now, Bezrat Hashem, there's a return to synagogues. I don't know when exactly. No one knows. The Almighty knows. But it will happen. And it's going to happen in a process of our rebuilding, a rebuilding internally, being uplifted by the experience, being happy by the fact that we can enter and that we can interact with others. And this gives us the tool to deal with tragedies. We saw tragedies, so it's difficult to read the news of what occurred today. So indeed, there should be a refuah shalema to those who need it, and a nechama to those who need it as well. Thank you again for participating, and a big yeshkoach to our sponsors,
At 9 o'clock?
Breslau, for sponsoring. And the neshama should have an aliyah. Thank you all. Any questions, you're more than welcome. Either put them in the chat.
Yishar Koach, Rabbi.
A good evening to all.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. Happy Lag BaOmer.
A happy one indeed. Thank you for participating. I thank everyone for coming. It's very kind of you. Hopefully we learned a little bit.
We should hear good news from Maran.
Amen. What can we say? A lot of good news. Tough times we live in. Try hard to understand the Almighty. Anyway, please take care of yourself.
Thank you.
And only good things. Okay.
Amen.
Good evening to all.